Lately been a space shadows crawl. Something's watching through the wall. Footsteps echo, no one there. Cold wind breathing down your neck, beware. Eyes in the dark, you feel it move. Truth or fear, what do you choose? Welcome to the dark side. Step inside the night. Creepy culture calling. Yeah, we shining bright. Stories that will haunt you. Truth you can't ignore. Jennifer's bringing what you felt before. Keep it creepy. Hear the unknown call. Keep it creepy. Something's in us all.
Hey, welcome to Creepy Culture. Thank you guys for being here. Super excited today because I have Gary Wayne, and he is the author of the Genesis 6 books, and he has so much knowledge and information about things. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him out because I'm so excited to hear him today. Hey, Gary.
Hey, thank you for inviting me to your show. So happy to be here. Looking forward to whatever we're going to talk about, but it'll probably be a little bit creepy.
It's okay. I'm down for it. So just go ahead and you can talk about, how you got doing this or whatever, and you just talk about Genesis 6. I want to hear that.
Yeah, so yeah, I didn't start off to be a researcher on giants or anything sort of in that sort of related genre. So I kind of backed my way into it through doing research on biblical prophecy. And the only way you can do that properly is you have to log everything throughout the Bible. So you have to do that many, many times. And you get to Genesis 6 pretty quick, and I'm going, whatever that's about. Uh, that's not supposed to be in the Bible, so I'll just ignore that. It was kind of like sort of cognizant dissonance.
Right.
But the problem, though, is as I kept logging the prophecy narratives, I can't ignore what's in the Bible. It's there for a reason, and these giants that are recorded in Genesis 6 show up all over the place, and they're somehow connected to angels with the sons of God, and they're somehow connected to demons. And so now we have this sort of spiritual being that can somehow take a physical form to pass on its DNA to reproduce. And we get these giants. And all of a sudden, it starts to click with me. My upbringing and reading in terms of understanding mythology and history says, taught me that what's being talked about in the Bible from Genesis through the end time is a similar sort of story told all around the world. There's a hidden history of how we got here, and there's a common sort of destiny with some nuances on the outcome. And so I thought, well, maybe I should take this a little bit more seriously. So I just sort of started to log it. And I logged all of them in there, and you don't get them the first time. And it takes a lot of times because you don't know what you're looking for. But when I decided I had enough information to write a book, I had these binders full of these sort of prophecy narratives, and I thought maybe I'll write some prophecy, but that wasn't going to be. So the thought is, I'm not a minister. I don't have a university education. I have no platform. And so can I write a book? Would anybody buy it? Would anybody like it? So I thought, well, the only way you're going to find out is try. So I thought, well, let's do something fun. Why don't we somehow connect Genesis 6 with Revelation? Because there's a connection with these fallen angels and stuff is all the way through. And that's how I got hooked into it. And so as I was writing that book, that sort of first 10 chapters came quite easily. But I also knew that this was a common story from the prehistorical side told everywhere. So I thought, well, I'll put in some Greek information. I'll put in some Sumerian, bring in some sort of land of the covenant aspects of that as well. And then I decided, well, there's a lot more than this that's around the world, but why don't I just start looking at what the religious texts are saying, because I want to be able to provide the culture in that sort of context of this creation of giants from gods or fallen angels as gods as they're recorded in polytheist religions. So I had to read all of those religious texts around the world, and that's a lot. I mean, the Gnostic texts are overwhelming, let alone the Vedas and things like that. And then I learned about mystery schools. And I thought, well, I have to learn about that because they're directly connected to the start of polytheism. And then that led me to the Association of Mystery Schools with Secret Societies, and I didn't know anything about secret societies. So I had to learn all about that. So it went from 10 chapters to 98 chapters, and I might as well call it 100 because there's a preface and an epilogue. So that's kind of how I got into this. But because of my understanding of mythology and learning about what the secret societies have to say on this and the polytheist religions, it opened my eyes to there's more going on here than just the creation of the giants.
Hmm.
This is just one sort of aspect of what happened when the gods ruled the earth and walked amongst us before the flood and shortly again after the flood.
Hmm. Those giants, though. There's a whole lot of stuff that I've seen on the internet about giants. Even, I mean, they're like everywhere in the history that I've
Yeah,
seen. So,
they are. And we're not always told that these are giants. We
mm-mm.
get this sort of pacified version. I got a mosquito trying to get me. I think I got him. And so if you go into like Greek history, and we get a lot of Greek history that's told, and if they're talking about Hercules or they're talking about Theseus or Perseus or Achilles, all of these beings are the offspring of a human female and a Greek god. It is the exact same story that's talked about in Genesis 6. When people look at the Atlantean story told by Plato and Critias and other accounts, Plato and Critias and Timaeus, I should say, and you have Poseidon, who's an offspring god that is co-ruling with Zeus as the chief of the gods, and he is going to mate with Cleito to produce 10 demigod giant kings to rule his empire. So the Atlantean story, which is everywhere, is part of that same giant sort of creations. When we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have a story in there of Utnapishtim, who is an archetypical giant at 2/3 god, 1/3 human, and all of his family are the same, are the chosen giants to survive the flood, just as you have Deucalion and Pyrrha as being giants, and Deucalion is the offspring of Prometheus, a god. So it's a giant survival story. So this is reproduced in all religions all around the world with the flood story. That's a common history that's not taught. It's not mathematically possible. And so the giant history has to be taken into account if we really want to fully understand what happened and why we got to where we are and what happened to those giants, and did they have descendants? Like, are there survivors? And all of that is what my research and my books talk about. And, a lot of people will say that giants, from a Christian perspective, is an exaggeration
Hmm.
and that it's just a tall human, but it's like somebody is 6 feet to somebody's 5 feet, or maybe the maximum is 7 feet. But, the word Nephilim says a tribe of giant, means a giant and a tribe of giants in the plural. And that people might say, well, it's also can mean a tyrant. Well, they were tyrant kings. Those are the Gyges, which is Greek for giant kings, right? These are the same. It's rooted in the same meaning, so we get a better understanding. So some say, well, they're bullies. Well, if you go into the Ugaritic text or the Epic of Gilgamesh that I was just talking about, the gods are called bulls, just as Nin is the fertility goddess that mated with King Lugobanda to create Gilgamesh, 2/3 god, 1/3 human as well, 19 feet tall.
Hmm.
And he's called a bull. And in the Ugaritic texts as another example. You have the Baalim Council that's associated with the Bible ruling, creating the Rephaim giants after the flood. And all of those gods are called bulls, including his father El, and the rest of the pantheon that rules, and their offspring, Rephaim, are also called bulls. So all of this is pointing towards a larger description and then pointing towards cross-culture understanding of these giants. And in Josephus's time, he talked about the flood story and the creation of the giants as being a standard understanding in all cultures of the world, or at least all of the cultures that he would have been familiar with. And so, and he equated the titans of the earth, the giants, the heroes, like Hercules, with the giants that were talked about in the Bible as being the same beings in the same creation. And so we have again this understanding that these are not just taller beings. And we know fallen angels can take a bodily form just as loyal angels can. And people say, well, that's not possible. They're spirit beings. Yes, they are in the spiritual dimension of heaven, and they can be in an opalescent form as a spirit form here as well. But, you know, in Hebrews 13, we know they can take a form because they can take the form of a human. And we're instructed there to be kind to strangers lest we come across an angel unaware. So they don't have to be recognized. In the Sodom and Gomorrah account, before the two angels in a bodily form who take a bodily form with Jehovah the Elohim, the pre-existent Jesus, to visit with Abraham. Abraham looks at them and thinks they're men at first, and they're described as men, the angels, and then they go to Sodom. So they weren't at first recognized, and they're eating, drinking, touching, doing everything that a physical being can do. But yet when they go to Sodom, they're instantly recognized as angels come to judge them. So they can be recognized if they want. But those are just two quick examples of how we know they can take a physical form. And if they can take a physical form, and this is where it starts to open up the avenues as to what else might have been going on, they can pass on their DNA to produce physical beings. And if they take a form of whatever their likeness should be, whether or not it's a seraphim angel, which has a serpent face, you would produce serpentine offspring. If you had a human face, like an archangel or one of the faces of a cherubim, which has four faces, it would produce offspring that would have dark hair and dark beards like Gilgamesh, versus the red-haired and the blonde-hair, hazel-eyed, blue-eyed, pale skin from the seraphim that originally had more of a serpentine look. So if you want to look at an example with diluted bloodlines after the flood of what a serpentine giant looks like, Google Akhenaten and turn that picture sideways or get it sideways, you're going to see a serpent's face. It's just it's a crossbreed sort of human. And, you know, cherubim has the face of a lion. So it also has a face of an eagle and has a face of a bull. Well, wait a minute. And you start saying, okay, well, we've got examples of lion men that are giant-like. We've got examples of the Tengu, which are both priests and warriors that have a bird's face, or the Zabalba in the Popol Vuh. And we have these lesser accounts of these bull images that were demigods, like a Moloch, perhaps, or an offspring of Moloch. And that a Quinatar in some of the royales' mythology of their heraldry was a bull type of demigod as well. And all of a sudden it starts to say, okay, well, if they took one of those forms as they're depicted as with a sphinx, which would be a cherub with either a human or a lion's head, that would be how they would be represented in a physical form. And when they took the form of a bull, you see these cherubs that are guarding the palaces and the temples in a little bit further east into Assyria and Mesopotamia. And then we have these gargoyle type beings, which are these bird faced ones. And on reliefs in Sumeria, we have these beings which are angels or gods, as they would be understood in polytheism, with these large wings, and they're doing this ceremony around this sort of some sort of mystical tree, and they've got a pine cone and they've got some sort of purse or handbag, and there's some sort
Yeah.
of technology and ritual going on. Those are depicted with a human's face with that dark hair and dark beard like Gilgamesh or Nimrod appear as, but also with this bird face.
Hmm.
And again, those are two images of cherubim taking a form with one face, which they do when they come to the physical world. And so we don't know what all the angels look like. We only know of a few of them. And so it's hard to know how many other angels or gods would have had offspring that created beings that had their DNA that might look like them. But we do know we have things like the lion men that are talked about, and we have these recorded in polytheist accounts as well, and shown on reliefs throughout the Middle East and Egypt. So, you have Nergal, that's a lion god, and he's a war god, and he's a god that the Avim giants in the Bible worshipped, along with another god named Nebaz, which means in Hebrew a barking god, and it was depicted with a dog's head or a jackal's head, just as Anubis was a jackal god and was said to produce in Egyptian history incredible amounts of offspring, so much so he built a city for them, and the Greeks called it Sinoopolis, which is Cynocephales is the dog man term. Sino means dog, and opolis means city. So they called it Dog City because of all of these dog giants. So it just opens up the door that we want not to be too narrow-minded on these mythoses that come down through our history that don't go away, that there's might be more to it than what first meets the eye.
Hmm. I agree. I hate that whatever you want to call it, society or whatever, just covers it up like it's not existent.
Yeah,
I hate that they
it
do that.
it's like, no, we can't acknowledge that. Why? Because it just doesn't fit with how we've been brainwashed to accept the world.
Exactly. And I hate that.
And yeah, and but how do you discount all of these types of beings discussed throughout our history in all continents and all cultures around the world except for Antarctica, and we don't know what we'll find in Antarctica? It's not mathematically possible. It's not plausible. It's not logical. That cannot be that they can have the same stories about the same beings
Hmm.
that we want to deny all over the world. And people will say, well, if there was giants, well, we should have, some skeletons of that. Well, they have been discovered
We
over the
do.
years. They
Yep.
just sort of disappear, right? And elongated skulls, which these aren't humanly elongated skulls because you can't increase the cranial volume. You can only make it elongated, but these massive cone head skulls, like Akhenaten's wearing this huge hat to cover it up with, is commonplace. And those elongated skulls used to be on display up to about 75 years ago, and they just said, let's take them and make them disappear. They just put them in the back rooms of the museums. There are newspaper stories. I have a spreadsheet that I send out to people when they request it. And I didn't create it, but it has old newspaper stories from the United States about the discoveries of giant bones.
Hmm.
And there's two common threads in here. One is that when they're discovered, they call a university and they go out and they do the archaeological dig, and then they contact the Smithsonian,
Hmm.
and they go to the Smithsonian and they're never heard of again. The other
Exactly.
stories that are in the newspaper stories is they just get a hold of the Smithsonian, the bones go directly there, and then there's no record after that. But yet we have these newspaper stories, and on the spreadsheet it'll give sort of the descriptions, but it also has the link to the newspaper article, and you can read exactly what they described as what they found.
Hmm.
And these are not 6 foot giants. You know, some of them are smaller, 7, 8 feet tall, but you have 9 feet, 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet, as big as 18 feet tall.
Yeah.
These are not humans that grew a little bit taller.
Mm-mm.
And so we do have a record of that. We have reliefs all over the world coming out of prehistory that show these giants, not only gods, but also giants as their offspring. This is common knowledge as it was before it got wiped from the history. And in Josephus's time, which is the time of Jesus, is this was common knowledge. This was accepted doctrine in all cultures.
I think that's awesome. But they do the Smithsonian, everything that goes there, any kind of thing, anything with
Yeah.
cryptids, anything they don't want us talking about or they lie to us about,
Yeah.
it's always there at the Smithsonian. They hide
Yeah,
everything.
well, we're learning how corrupted they are right now in terms of some
Mhm.
of the things that are coming out, but they've always been corrupted because they've been controlled by the bloodlines and the secret society. So
Absolutely.
the Smithsonian Institute was donated from a dowry of money from James Smithson, who was a Rosicrucian and a member of the Royal Society, and they donated the money to have that established as a branch in the United States. And the Royal Society has been sort of recognized as the world of science and the center and capital of science ever since its development, but it's been collecting all of the OOPArts, out of place artifacts, and making them disappear all throughout their history. They're
Hmm.
not there to advance our understanding, they're there to control the narrative. So the Smithsonian, it has its roots and bloodlines and secret societies. And that should not be surprising to people if they understood that science is still controlled by the polytheist religions, because that's how polytheism comes about, is through these sciences. They were called the 7 sacred sciences before the flood that merged with the knowledge of the gods or the fallen angels from the monotheist side, and that it had made the knowledge explode to a level that we're just catching up to this day. And we can get into some of those details if you like on that. And to protect this knowledge, they created the mystical religions. That was an initiatory organization. And anything that's initiatory is polytheist. You have to swear an oath. It's part of the secrets. And you learn more in that system as you go through. And you become an adept at first level, uh, which is 33 degree of the York Rite, or the old system, divide that by 11, take it down to the 3rd degree adept. And at that level, you start to learn all the hidden history and information. And if you look at campuses to this day, university campuses, they generally have all of these ancient sort of beast empire architecture of Greece and Rome and Babylon, and you have a system that is set up where you're learning, and what do you get from there? You get a degree, just as you do in Scientology, or just as you do in Freemasonry, as you go up the degree system. And then you are given these sort of sealed diplomas, which is, again, a contract as it's understood, and a seal of an oath from prehistory. And you're wearing black garbs, which are Mithraic priest gowns, or Cathar and Albigensians, as you move a little bit further down through the history. You're participating in a polytheist ritual in your graduation, and you don't know it because you've just received a degree of learning. And it all makes sense if you understand that this ancient religion was a knowledge cult, and Gnosticism, as we would understand it in the West, that is the parent for Theosophy and New Age, comes from the Greek word gnosis, for knowledge. It's a Gnostic knowledge religion, right? And
Yeah.
they present all of this in plain sight. We just have been dumbed down not to recognize it. So now anything in university or science, it's only named after their history back to the gods. So if you've got something that's going as a rocket ship, the Apollo system, Apollo's a god. Even Elon Musk, he's got a dragon rocket. I mean, that's a seraphim angel.
Hmm.
Everything is named after their gods to honor their gods and their demigods.
Hmm. They think they're slick with their little symbolism, don't they?
They do, and
Hmm.
and but they get away with it. Most
They
people have
do.
not yet sort of opened their eyes yet to how the world is really run, and they dumb us down to and keep us dumbed down. But it brings out the arrogance as well, because everything they do is they're showing who they are, and they know we're not smart enough to recognize that. And the only reason why we're not smart enough is we've been prepared since childhood
Hmm.
to not believe in anything except what we're told to believe in.
Exactly. It's like brainwashing at its finest.
It is.
Indoctrination. I really hate that too, but even I've like known this stuff forever and I try to tell people and I look like the crazy person, Well, I promise this is the way it is, but I guess some people just can't even open their mind that
Yeah.
to even think that.
So let me blow some people's minds here a little bit.
Do it, Gary.
So this is Josephus, who was a Pharisee in the time of Jesus, and he was a general in the revolt. And of course, you have the diaspora of the Jewish people at that point. And he was commissioned when he was captured to write the history of the Jewish people because everything was going to be lost, they thought. So here's what his account is on giants in the time of the Exodus. If people don't think giants were in the Exodus, they were just before the flood. Guess what? That's what that whole Exodus set of wars is all about, or giant wars. So here's
Hmm.
what he described in Antiquities, Book 5, chapter through 2, verse 3. So it says, for which reason they removed their camp to Hebron. And by the way, Hebron was named Kiriath Arba before Hebron, which is the parent of the Anakim giants after the flood. So they removed their camp to Hebron. When they had taken it, they slew all of the inhabitants. There were till then left the race of the giants, who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of other men. They had museums for people to go in to look at these bones so that when they look back on their history, they knew what a giant was and what their ancestors had to fight.
Hmm. They just cover it up all the
They
time.
they just cover it up all of the time.
Yep.
So this is going to gives a little bit of information to people as well in terms of the types of giants. We already talked about the seraphim, but this comes out of the secret book according to John. This is a Gnostic gospel. And it's talking about the creations of the rulers, and it is 10:26 to 33. But anyways, Baoth is a god that's in there, and it's the first ruler is said to have created and established 7 other androgynous beings. So Athos had the face of a sheep, so a ram, like a ram god, like Ares. Um, Io had a 7-headed serpent look, so he was the Hydra-like look, multiple heads. Sabaoth had the face of a serpent or a dragon, so a seraphim. Adonin with the face of an ape. Well, that has quite a relationship to a kinship to Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Elios had the face of a donkey or a jackal. However you're an ass or however you wanted to, but that's an interesting one as well. And Astaphaeus had the face of a hyena, which would be more closer to the jackal, I would say. Sabete had the face of glowing fire. So that's in the Gnostic gospel of the secret book according to John, but we get even more in Pistis Sophia in chapter 4, chapter 126, and starting in about verse 20, is talking about the prison that ancient rulers and watchers were put into for the crimes that they committed, creating the giants. This is the pit prison in the Bible, or the abyss in Revelation 9, where these beings are coming out in the end time. So here's a description of some of these ones. And they've got 12 different rulers here. So the first ruler, um, he had the face of a crocodile. Well, we have a god in the Egyptian pantheon named Sobek. That's a crocodile god.
Hmm.
And you have one that I won't go through their names, or they're a bit complicated here. I don't want to get into too much of the minutiae. You have one that's got a cat or a lion's face, one that's got a dog's face, one that's got a serpent's face, another one that has a bull's face, another one that has a boar's or a wild pig's face, one that has a bear's face, which also would have kinship to Bigfoot. Um, you also have ones that has a vulture or an eagle's face that we've already talked about. And so that's just a few. I mean, I won't go, that's not all of them. There's a couple more, but that gives the people an idea of what some of these angels and gods look like.
Yeah, they, that's wild. And it's
Isn't
in
it?
every, yeah,
Yeah.
they're in cave drawings too, and they're like in every culture, like the same pictures and stuff. You know what I mean? That
Y-
they drew.
y- Yeah. And so we know what an archangel looks like. It's got a human's face. We know the four faces of a cherubim. We know what a seraphim looks like. An Ophanium, if people aren't familiar with that, that's one of the four groups of watchers. It's listed in the book of Enoch. And it does show up in the Bible. It's just that it's not translated as you would translate cherub or cherub, as it was originally pronounced in the Hebrew. This is in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, where you have these angels within the wheels, the concentric wheels. And where it's talking about the wheels, that's the Hebrew word gilgal for wheel. Another word for wheel is ophan, which are describing these angels within the wheels. These are the Ophanim that Enoch describes as the throne angels, using the name Ophanim. And they have three faces of the cherubim, and then one face that is a cherubim. So we know three different faces as individuals, but we don't know what that fourth face would be. Is it all four, or we're not told. But after that, we know what lowest level angels, they tend to have a human look, but we don't know what does arche look after, as in the principalities, as you take that back to the Greek. We don't know what dunamis for mighty or powers, as they're described in the Bible, that goes back to. We don't know um, who arche that we talked about as principalities, or excusia, for example. We don't know what Icarus looked like. These are all different types of angels used in the New Testament, translated inconsistently, so as to maybe confuse us as to uh, which is which, because you have like dunamis and excusia both being translated as powers. So you have to go back to figure out which one it's talking about. But we don't know what they look like. So we have no idea what type of offspring they may have created. And we also don't know as to what other types of things the fallen angels, with the tremendous knowledge and technology that they had, what else they were able to do, except
Right.
through understanding prehistory.
So there could be stuff walking around we don't even know what they look like, but they could be one of those,
Yeah.
because they don't describe them.
Yeah. Well, we have some interesting things that we can sort of look at that they said that they created in prehistory. And so we have these chimera type of creatures, right? They have multiple types of animals combined into them. So that sort of implies almost like some sort of DNA manipulation as well. You need the life force of the god to be passed on, and the normal DNA would be their DNA. So unless they created a form like that to pass all of it on, it would suggest that they did an additional process to create these chimera type of beings. And, in the Gnostic tradition, we get this Amonka Seth, that's a giant like individual that's created in a cloud and saved from the flood in a cloud. And in Greek mythology with Hera, we have the centaurs being created in a cloud. So I don't know whether that's representing some sort of technology, but they are distinct from the other giants. And the centaurs are the ones in Greek mythology that actually educated the giants and taught them in the mystery schools. So we have King Hababa of the Cedar Forest in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He's got so many creepy parts on him, it's absolutely unimaginable. But yet, this is a physical giant that's different than Gilgamesh is, or Utnapishtim, or any of the family, or Enkidu. So, my thought process is there's likely some sort of DNA manipulation that is also going on in there. We also know the gods in polytheism created the elementals. And if people aren't familiar with what the elementals are, this is 4 categories of beings. The most common are 3 groups of little ones for the most part. So you've got like mischievous ones like the leprechauns or the pixies or the brownies or the menhue. You have good looking ones, which are known as the little people, and you have like neroids and sprites and mermaids and nymphs that are part of these. And then you have the ugly ones like dwarves, and then you have gnomes, and you have hobbits, and you have goblins and trolls, and all of these different groups of ugly ones. And within that group, you have one that is described exactly as a gray alien that controlled all of the knowledge and the technology of the demigods in the hierarchy. And all of these are created like giants are, as little people, but they're different. They're not huge. So is there some sort of manipulation to reduce them in size and to give them different kinds of looks as well? Because you can go to any polytheist religion around, and it's all of their recollections of the different names of these same beings go back to being offspring of the gods. And then the 4th one was really creepy, which is the salamanders. And these are reptilian beings that are a little bit bigger than humans. And they're connected with the elemental fire. All of these are elementals because they're connected with a basic element. Salamanders with fire. So earth, wind, air, and fire would be, the examples of those. And we see that show up in our entertainment all of the time of the 4 elements. But we're never explained why they're telling us these things are, or what the connection are. But they represent beings that held a lot of angelic technology or technology of the gods, including UAPs. And the one that looks like a gray alien, they actually have abducted people throughout our history and look exactly as a gray alien is described, and doing the same sexual experimentations. And then we have the reptilians that are part of the alien mythos. So now you start to wonder, are some of these beings that are being represented to us as being aliens, are they just more interdimensional beings as what we understand biblically and in monotheism with different dimensions, and with polytheism as a very much a standard sort of doctrine? And then you also have a Hopi tradition of these ant-like people who come before the flood, and they come from living in the earth, and they have all sorts of technology, the ability to see like oracles into the future, and they're going to prepare subterranean places for the Hopi to survive the Great Flood. And all of a sudden you say, what's with these ant people? And is that a one off? Well, no, it's not a one off. And you also have um, a Greek tradition with Zeus, who creates from an island, on an island from ants, people that are ant people that are as tall as humans and
Hmm.
are also um, understood to look like a mantis or a praying mantis. And the Greek word for mantis is basically an oracle,
Hmm.
right? And it's the same description as these beings that the Hopi are saved by. And now you see in that alien disclosure thing, you have grays as part of them. You have the mantis type of people that are one
Hmm.
group. You have the reptilians as another. And
Yep.
then you have the Nordics, which is a white elf, as it's described in The Lord of the Rings, which is an allegory for the seed or Shade, shed, all sorts of different pronunciations to it, Sidhe, of the Tuatha De Danann. These are the fair folk giants, and they're just sort of reduced in size from what they would have been. So now you have giants, you have salamanders, you have grays, and you have ant cryptoids that are part of these beings that were being fed that, and it's only part of all the other different beings that were created. So we should look for more of this for understanding out of prehistory.
You just blew my whole mind too. I'm sitting here trying to process what you just said, but you're right. That's how it
Yeah,
is. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Gosh.
it is. So you wonder how, I mean, this word mantis, meaning an oracle, we have oracles that are quite common in Greek history, like the oracles of Delphi, the Sibylline or the Kybline oracles. And the mantis were associated with these oracle cults. So again, all of a sudden we see details from across the oceans matching up to, again, what happened with the Hopi clan. And then the Hopi clan says that they had help in civilization after the flood from the White Snake clan.
Hmm.
You know, and so if you have giants that either survived the flood that would come from a seraphim or recreated like Baal, who's a Uraeus god, a serpentine god, just as Osiris is, just as Zeus is an Uraeus god, serpentine. And there, if you Google Ureus, it's going to show these flying serpents, and you'll have, you know, Osiris's consort as well. I don't want to say her name because we're on YouTube and it's a terrorist organization, so we don't want that to be taken down.
Right.
um, but this White Snake clan is the same, and they come from an island like Atlantis. And Atlantis, the giants there were described as red-haired and blonde-haired, pale-skinned,
Hmm.
blue eyes, hazel eyes, and as giants. And they're also described as serpents. So all of a sudden, if you have survivors of Atlantis, or however you want to understand the Hopi recollection of that, who come, these beings that come from an island after the flood to help with civilization, you have a direct connection that they're telling about the same history and the same types of people. And that's what I do, is I look for common denominators. And because it's within the common denominators that we can understand things as a unique, untold history and, and a traditional sort of meaning to how should we interpret things today. Well, we should look back at prehistory because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be uh, again. And if that's true, then we're going to see all of these types of creatures in the end time.
Hmm.
So we want to understand not only these beings, but the type of technology that they had. So when we look at Chimera technology, and we're using that name in our science and education institutions for DNA manipulation, we should understand this is angelic technology that we're trying to recreate and catch up to. That was before the flood. If you look at buildings like the Great Pyramids, and we have like the Stela of Narma and Menes, which shows the 52-degree slope of the Great Pyramid in the background, dated to 3000 in BC or before. The dating of 23 to 2400 by Khufu or Khafra doesn't stand up to the archaeological record. But we can't create that today. They try and tell us we can, but when you look at what they're telling us, the ramp that they're using is a bigger project than the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have no idea how they were able to move these rocks up. It
Right.
it makes no sense. We can't do the same joints, the same masonry. They have survived thousands and thousands of years, and we can't build something like that today. They have sacred geometry of polytheism because numerology and sacred geometry is the number of the gods built in to honor the pantheon of the gods. They have earth and earth ratios mixed in with the dimensions of the pyramids, and they're aligned to astrological alignments. And we can't do that today. So, how did they build a city like Machu Picchu in the mountains?
Right.
We can't do that today. And we can't do that with the same quality of masonry. So these are the types of things that we want to be aware of, that we're just catching up to what was before. And what's really kind of interesting in the secret society and the Gnostic account, in the time just before the flood, they knew destruction was coming. And this comes right out of their religious texts and right out of the writings of the history of Freemasonry and out of the Polychronicon. So they knew it was either going to be fire or water. So they created two pillars. They're understood as the pillars of Enoch and the pillars of Lamech. Same pillars. And there was instructions as to where they could find this ancient bank of knowledge, because they knew that civilization was going to come to an end and it was going to be a complete restart, as Plato said, that everybody, the only survivors, had no technology, no writing, they had to start all over. And so they buried this beneath, guess what? The Great Pyramid, in 9 vaults in 36,525 books, which is kind of a allegorical number for a year or a solar year, which is, again, so it's an allegory. We don't know how many books or whether or not they were books or what the method was used to store it in. But they were stored underneath the pyramid, and a fellow by the name of Hermes finds this information and brings it back to Nimrod at Babel after the flood. So what we do know is the flood came, but they built one to survive a flood. So that's the one that Hermes found, but they also built the other one with the same instructions to survive a destruction by fire. The only way you would do that is if you had technology to destroy the earth by fire. And this is a bit of my speculation here, but I'll connect it to 2 Peter 3 in a second. I think God interceded with the flood so that the world would not be destroyed by fire as it was in the beginning, as 2 Peter 3 talks about. And that destruction by fire is for the end time. So that was an intercession. And the polytheists actually believed it could be a destruction by fire. And in their belief system, you have these cycles of alternating sort of periods of time in celestial procession of destruction by fire and destruction by water. And in 2012, we started the age of Aquarius, which comes with destruction of fire. And so what we see is when we look into what they're looking at is a new destruction was coming, and they were preparing so that that bank of knowledge would not be totally lost. And again, it just goes to the technology. So when we look at these gods of war, whether it's Ares or Nergal or whichever one you want to use, they're all the same gods in the same pantheons, just different names for the different gods. Separated by parent gods and offspring gods, where parent gods like El rule before the flood and Baal rules after the flood. Kronos rules before the flood, Zeus after the flood, Ra before the flood, Osiris after the flood. Same constant all around the world, same story all around the world, where the offspring gods overthrew the parent gods. Well, they didn't. They didn't kill them. They went to the pit prison. And then the offspring gods did the same crimes and they went to the pit prison. They're still ruling today through the Council of Gods, but other ones have moved up to replace them in the Council of the Gods. So as we understand all of this into our mix, is that this knowledge that is propelling us at levels that we can't imagine right now is exactly what happened just before the flood. Why? Because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again.
Yeah, that is correct. There was a couple questions in chat. Hold on one second. Can you see that, Gary?
I can. Says, are the reptilians fallen angels or something else? I'm going to need to watch this a couple more times. There is so much great info. No way I'm going to catch it the first time around. That's what a lot of people say about any of the shows is because what I try and do is I try and create some truth or veracity to it. So when we talk about reptilians, we have different types of reptilians. So understand that you have giant kings before the flood and early after the flood described as serpents. And they populated most of the royal families, not the warrior class, but most of the governing class. And those are the offspring of fallen angels. So that's one type of serpent as a giant. But there are other kinds of serpents, as with these salamanders. And so that is an elemental. It's not part of the white elf or the Nephilim group. It's a similar type of creation, but it's distinct. It'd be distinct like a cryptoid would be, or a distinct as a Bigfoot would be. So creation again from the gods, but distinct. So the salamanders have a couple of possibilities here. So one of the main possibilities for this, for me, is that you have a being called a serpent in the Old Testament that was walking, talking, and intelligent. And it's the serpent that is going to deceive Eve and Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. And it's created before the people of day 6, maybe up to 1,000 years as you look at 2 Peter 3. And because a day is like 1,000 years, as it says that. And we don't get the sun and the moon put into the firmament before day 4. So the first days are going to be 1,000 years, and one would expect those days for humans would be 1,000 years as you move through right through day 7. So in day 6, you have the beast of the fields that are created, that the serpent Nahash, as the Hebrew word for serpent is, would have been created on as a beast of the field. And humans from day 6 would have been likely created 1,000 years after that, or somewhere after the beasts of the field, just in the order it's set out in Genesis 1. And so it's this being that has everything at risk if Adam is going to be raised above them and receive all of the blessings out of day 6. And so it becomes a willing participant, which means the fallen angels had already used them and corrupted them, and were following the fallen angels, the council of gods, and not as what Adam and Eve would have originally been following in the Garden of Eden. So this word Nahash has a source word for necromancer, enchanter, sorcerer, so it's a priest. But it's described as the Gnostics as being taller than a human, as tall as a camel. And this description is very much like and identical to the slightly taller salamandered reptilians in the reptilian mythos in the earth and as part of the um, alien mythos, and higher than the elemental smaller groups, the three little groups. So higher up in the hierarchy, there's that consistency. So this seems to be, and a bit of my speculation here is, we're not told how these walking, talking, intelligent beings were created, just we know they lost all of that ability to once God punished them. And so they are either a creation of the gods directly, similar to the elementals, or there's some sort of DNA manipulation going on there to create them, but they are distinct. And so if the fallen angels had the ability to have giants survive the flood, or recreate them after the flood, or both, then that might hold for these Nahash beings and the source for the alien inner earth reptilian beings that live within the earth. And understand, all of these live within the earth. It's just a matter, is that the physical earth or is that another dimension where Hades, Sheol, and Nibiru are located versus earth or Nibiru Ki? And Nibiru Ki is the Sumerian word for earth, not Nibiru. Nibiru means a crossing of the earth. So where the gods live is in Shades in Greek, in Sheol, Hades in Greek, in Sheol in Hebrew, and Nibiru in Sumerian. So it's the same location in the earth. And so again, we have these sort of constants. So it's important to sort of keep those things in mind as we look at these various groups and how they were created. And all of these are working for the fallen angels, for the council of the gods who rule over this earth that Satan sits above. Now, I'm a monotheist, but polytheists would look at this whole ruling structure as being good, versus a monotheist, we would look at that as bad, right? They would look at us as bad, just as we would look at them as bad. It's your perspective. So history is told through those two lenses of monotheism and polytheism. And if we understand those are just two different lenses, we can see the common denominators.
I think you answered the other question. Basically, he was asking where you think the giants how they've stayed hidden, but you said inner Earth, so or another dimension. So
Yeah, or in stasis. So we don't know how, but we do have some instances like the Afghanistan giant, which is an interesting one that just is a red-haired giant, pale skin, that was caught and killed in Afghanistan, or maybe taken alive. We don't know, but they did have technology, right? So they could have had some sort of technology that permitted them to be in stasis, or they may have had the ability to be off the earth or in the earth with the help of fallen angels. But here's something that should freak people out, if I haven't done a lot of that already. We have US government information on this technology, and possibly link technology to something that would be in stasis. So there's a FOIA number, and it's F-2019-02110. And it was made by Dinetra DeSenegar from the Hillary Clinton office after she had left office, after she was Secretary of State. And so here's what they were looking for. And understand, she was Secretary of State for part of the Iraqi war and things that were happening in that time. So they're requesting the documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, the location of his body, and the location of the other buried Nephilim. So we don't know what they got on that, but she was obviously aware of that as being Secretary of State, and it's being classified. And a FOIA request is to get release classified information.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know what was sent to her, but I mean, you're talking resurrection chamber. We don't have that technology today.
Mm-mm.
And what the heck are they talking about and finding the bodies of Nephilim? That means they captured some.
Exactly.
And if they captured them, what are they likely trying to do? They're doing DNA
Mm-hmm.
studies. They they are probably already well on their way to creating a giant Nephilim Jurassic Park, if I
Most
can put
likely.
it in those terms, right?
Yep.
So when we look at the entertainment, they tell us what they're going to be doing,
Yes, they do.
but we're not clued in enough to understand, hey, this is really good entertainment, but what's the message here? And they tell us a consistent message in all of the media and the literature and all the entertainment because they control all of that.
Mm-hmm. That is one thing they do. They do tell on themselves. They'll put it right out and open for people that are aware to
Yeah.
see. I don't
Yeah.
know what everybody else is seeing, but clearly not what people like me see or you see. But that's what they
So
do.
so when we talk about let's talk about who they are in terms of today, but let's go back to the beginning. So
Hmm.
when the giants are created both before and after the flood, these are not sideshow freaks. These are perfect killing machines and highly intelligent. And I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but they would have had 140 plus in terms of the IQ intelligence. And people with their blood types typically have that type of intelligence even to this day. And it doesn't matter whether you're using NASA for Star Child research for RH negative or from the giant side, you get the same results on the testings. And they have like lower blood pressure, lower temperature, more red hair, blonde hair, hazel eyed, blue eyes, and all sorts of, and believe they can't be cloned, all sorts of different sort of things. So when we look then at the history of who these giants were, and we talked about Tuatha De Danann, or the Tanu of the Ugaritic text, the Tuatha Danu of the giants, these are the Indo-European peoples, the Indo-Iranians or Aryans. These are the Sanskrit Aryans that settled after the flood and were here before the flood. And that these groups of people um, called Aryans,
Hmm.
just as the Nazis tried to recreate the giant blonde hair, blue eyed, pale skinned Aryan super race that they believed they were descended from Tula, the Norse sort of version of Atlantis. Um, we have this group of Aryans, and that name Aryan from area means the noble ones, the nobility. These are the rulers. They took control of the kingships. And the top two classes of the four class system, feudal system as it became known in Europe, that controlled the earth throughout most of our history. And they populated those top two classes. They controlled the kings and the queens and the larger royal families. They controlled all of the courts. They controlled all of the education system. They controlled all of the armies with the officers and the generals, and the humans were just the foot soldiers, the collateral damage, the pawns being sacrificed, so to speak. And they controlled um, all of the literature and all of all of the things and all of the large businesses. And it was the third and fourth classes that were populated by humans who weren't educated until the last 150 years or so. And they were only permitted in the third class to operate as in the old sort of entrepreneurial systems of bakers and tailors and blacksmiths, sort of required manual labor to service the top two classes. And then you have the slave class and the ritual labor class that they pulled for their rituals from as you go back for human sacrifices. So when we look at that system, they've populated and controlled all of our history, all of the knowledge, all the way through. And even when you had Christianity come about, by the time of Constantine, it's now taken over by who? The educated elite, elite, as you would pronounce that. El being an angel or a god. They believe they're the offspring of the gods, the elite, the Elim, as they would originally been known as. And the elites occupy these top two classes through their education and their status and through genealogy. These are the people that we're talking about when we're talking about they. So the royals have something called heraldry. So you have a coat of arms, and they have taciturn imagery that takes back who they are to their parent celestial mafia godfathers or fallen angels or gods. So what do you see on these coats of arms? You see bulls, you see eagles, you see dragons as in seraphims, you see lions. These are all things that we were talking about that they trace their genealogies back to the beginning of time. So Prince Charles, he's on record for saying that he is, when he was Prince Charles, he's now king, of course, that his genealogy goes back to Vlad the Impaler. Understand, they track their genealogies, as in for the genes, as in what would create the bloodlines. In other words, they believe, and the Windsors have O negative, which is the more traditional one of the ruling royal families, and that Rh negative is their original blood type that was added. Now, people will say you can't add something that's missing. And what they're talking about that is Rh negative in all four blood types is missing the D antigen. So you can't add something that's missing something. But that's not what they really track. They track the genes, the genealogy in their family trees, because it's the gene that produces the blood type. And they track their gens as in the LB gens that would be more closely appropriate for Prince Charles. Or you would have the credit gens that comes down for the Gyges, Herculides kings. And Hercules is the son of Zeus and Alcmene for the Gyges kings after the flood. They track these bloodlines. And you would have like the Julia gens, for example, and there's several other ones that are part of the 100 families of Rome for the black nobility that comes from Romulus and Remus, offspring of Ares or the god Mars in the Latin pantheon. It always works that way in these genealogies. And so with these genes, they try and keep those genes as pure as possible. And they track the intermarriages to establish where they fit in the hierarchy. So Prince Charles takes his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler through the Hanovers, which the Windsors changed their name to in World War I for obvious reasons, because this is the same Hanover family of King George in the American Revolution, right? When they take over the British monarchy from Germany. And through the Middle Europa intermarriage is where he tracks his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler, who has two other branches that go back in their history. But I'll just do the one, and this one goes back to the Egrathi tribe of Scythians, Tuatha De Danann, Indo-Aryan giants that are produced by Hercules, son of Zeus and Alcmene, and part of the Cretagens. So what he's telling you is I have a nobleness in, when he's telling us that, he has an LB gens that goes back to a different Norse bloodline, as in Odin, with the LB gens, and with Zeus. So he has a very noble position.
Wow.
And they've controlled the world throughout our history.
They have.
And and only 15%, that's 1/5, there's only 15% of the population that has Rh negative blood.
Yeah.
So, and they like to keep that in very tightly within, but they do have an issue that they have to intermarry with humans, which is what happened after the flood, where they weren't able to produce enough females. And it's through the female that the Rh negative gene that produces that is thought to be mostly sent down through. And they use the females, purebloods, to create new dynasties with a scion of another dynasty. So a dragon bloodline and a fairy bloodline as they do their allegories. Dragon for the male blood, fairy blood for the female blood. You could also use raven with dragon or owl as well. There's the two sets of allegories. And what that does is provide two different types of watcher groups. One being seraphim, one being cherubim. Again, they're communicating this to us. We just haven't been taught how to decode it. And so the females were used to start new dynasties, and they were rare. They had a fertility issue after the flood, and this shows up with these giants being called the terrible ones, as King Ababa is a terrible one. They're called terrible ones in the Bible. And in that term, Arit, or Ritim in the plural in the Hebrew, you get all these meanings for giants and a fertility issue. And it's manifested in the lack of females. So they have to intermarry with humans, but they don't want to dilute their bloodlines too much because then they're going to become mundane. So it's a balance. So they set up within 4 generations not to intermarry. But when we understand this, when they make that mistake of intermarrying in not enough distance, you get blood diseases like hemophiliac disease, which the Royals are known for. Also, classic Habsburg jaw disease, which people can Google. And so that's what happens if they don't pay attention to that. So they always need sort of new blood. And to bring this sort of full circle to understand how much power they had, understand World War I as an inter-family squabble. They were all first cousins, all of the kings. And it was a power play within the royal families. If we want to understand how the world works, we have to understand who rules the world.
Right.
And they believe they have the divine right to rule provided to them by the council of the gods as it comes down through their particular genealogies to a specific celestial mafia godfather.
Mm-hmm. We have questions again.
Okay.
There's one on the screen. It just says, "Is that why the female and male Sasquatch look so different from their face, with their facial features?"
It's certainly possible. I mean, Sasquatch would come from a different type of watcher angel. It's not giant-like. It is intelligent. We don't know how intelligent. It does communicate. We know that. It is associated with being amongst some of the little peoples quite regularly. It's associated with caves and portals. And there seems to be some human DNA that's in there from some of the things that I've read over the years. So what goes into the makeup could be a couple different types of watchers, one being female, one being male. But you're right, there is a interesting sort of difference between the male and the female that's not really explained that I've seen in any of the research. But it has to do probably with who originally created them and what type of DNA manipulation might have went into that. Because you could code anything into the DNA, one to be reproduced by females and one by males. We don't have that technology yet, but the angels had that technology.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And then there was another question too. Why has there been so many intermarriages of the royal families?
Well, because as pure as they can keep that is where they fit into the hierarchy. So you'll see coats of arms change when you have that scion, first son, inheritor of an important bloodline, marrying a very important fairy queen. Then their coats of arms will change with that intermarriage. So they don't want to dilute their bloodlines, but they have to. So they want to control that. They don't want to be mundane. They believe they are superior demigods. They're superior beings to us. And the lower that genealogical mix, the lower they are in the hierarchy. So they're not as important within their cult. So they track all of that so that they can be properly recognized and be properly positioned. So, and where this sort of came from with these coats of arms was when early on, where they were traveling by horseback or walking or however, they would need something to go into another realm where they would be recognized for who they were. So they created this heraldry language that they would put on flags or standards. And so when they went into a realm that may not know them, they would look at that and understand where they fit.
And somebody was asking, DJB Outdoors was wondering, could the young or juveniles be watchers? The Bigfoot.
I'm not quite sure what they're asking there, but Watchers has two different classifications. Watcher as in a watcher angel or a watcher God. So we got watchers in Daniel 4 times. It goes back to the Hebrew word ayir, meaning to watch and to be awake as you take it back to Ur. And it also can mean a city, because a city was a watch as well, but it's a separate word in Hebrew. And a watcher angel comes from the throne room, the presence of God. So those four groups of watchers: seraphim, archangels, cherubim, ophanim. So when they produced offspring, they were called watchers too. So in Hebrew, the fallen ones are Nephilim, and it's the source word for Nephilim. So there's a very close association. So now you move over to the Sumerian history, Mesopotamian history, is you have watchers of heaven and watchers of the earth. Well, the watchers of the earth are the demigods. The watchers of heaven, the Gidji, are the heavenly ones. And a Gidji goes back to Sumerian meaning as in to eye or to watch in ancient Sumerian. It's the same understanding that is coming through with the Hebrew word. You have in the Greek drakonta, that's the source word, and drakont for dragon or drake, all the same word and meaning. Drakonta means watcher. So in Greek mythology or history, you have titans of heaven and titans of the earth. So Zeus would be a titan of heaven, Hercules would be a titans of the earth. It's the same MO in the language in all the cultures around the earth. Now, when you get into more of the oral traditions of these watcher angels and their demigods, it's very hard whether or not it's in the Finnish or the Norse tradition to distinguish the difference between a giant and one of the gods in terms of how the oral tradition comes down. But understand, the giants are still the offspring of the gods. It's just more difficult in the oral traditions. So, yeah, so when we look at watchers, if you're talking about juvenile, I would interpret that as the offspring, but I wouldn't use that term for an offspring god. So as Zeus is an offspring god of Gaia and Kronos, as the parent gods, I wouldn't say he's the juvenile. That is just making part of the narrative, the allegory to hold their history. These are angels that live, these are fallen angels that lived before the flood, both of them. It's just that the offspring gods didn't rule until after the flood, until the parent gods were removed. These are fallen angels that all rebelled at the same time. There's a hierarchy of angels. There's a hierarchy, and it's called Saba in Hebrew, which means an army of angels, which means it has rank and order, right? So Zeus moved up after Kronos was removed. Osiris moved up after Ra was removed, so on and so forth. The word hierarchy is Greek for meaning as sacred assembly of archons of the Council of the Gods. And that hierarchy is at the top of the hierarchy, and then you have the lower ranks below that.
That's a lot. I'm trying to process everything still. Um, no, I'm about to have a weird question, but
Sure, they're all good
so
questions.
so Sasquatch, just for instance, the
Yeah.
Sasquatch. Okay, if they're like interdimensional or
Mhm,
whatever, and they come here and they're in our
mhm.
woods, do these things, or do they eat because of what they are, or are they like physically all the way here when they come in, or
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's look at um, a concept of interdimensional and inner earth. And they're not necessarily the same thing. So you can have in the earth, in a physical sort of understanding, as what the salamanders or the reptilians are said to live in the earth physically. And even the ant people, you could kind of get there as well. And that would mean there's nothing that needs to be extraordinary there because they're physical beings in the physical world, just in the earth, right?
Mhm.
But we also talked about that Nibiru occupies the same space as Nibiru Key, but in another dimension. Hades, opera, is in the same location in another dimension. So some of the elementals and beings seem to have interdimensional capabilities. And so I don't know what they do within Hades or Sheol in that different dimension that allows a physical being to be there, but it is different than the dimension of heaven. And it's not part of the seven heavens in polytheism or the three heavens in monotheism. So there's something distinct about Hades or Sheol that also has the pit prison as well, but not likely the lake of fire. It's likely in another dimension. So I don't know how they're able to do that and cross over. I don't know whether or not there is some sort of environment in another dimension that allows them to do that, or they're coming in some sort of protection or quantum bubble or force field that allows them to be here and not, have an issue with that. We don't have information on how that works. What we do know is they come through different portals, and there's more than just the gods that have the ability to do that. I understand how gods could do that because they can create a form at will anytime they want, and they're naturally spirit beings. So unless all of these elementals and types of beings that are coming through are spiritual beings and they are able to create their own oiketerion in the physical world, like angels can do. Oiketerion is a Greek word for dwelling place of the spirit that's used in Jude 1:6 with habitation and house in heaven as a dwelling, oiketerion, or a dwelling place for the spirit. But we don't have scripture or any other records that suggest elementals can create their own oiketerion. In fact, they're looking for DNA removal, even the ones that move interdimensionally. So what I would lean for is some sort of protected environment for them in another dimension, because I know they can be in the earth and they can also go into another dimension.
Okay, that explains a lot to me because I had questions after you go out and see stuff in the woods. You're just kind of like, okay, where are these things coming from? How are they invisible sometimes? Are they eating food? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just want to know what's going on there a little bit. It's
Well, you know,
a lot.
gods can have a changeling capability, but some of the elementals can as well, particularly in the trickster spirit ones of the leprechauns. They tend to have more capability for changeling capabilities. So again, that is not sort of normal as well. That's an extraordinary power that's somehow been passed on to them in their creation from the fallen angels.
It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of knowledge. to take in, but I mean, I know that's exactly the truth too. You know, all of it, and it's just a lot for some people to comprehend. But I loved hearing about it because it just confirms what I pretty much knew too. You know, so I love that. I love that other people think like me. So
Yeah. So what I would say to people in terms of these beings is that we're going to get a narrative of intergalactic, and we're already seeing that.
mm-hmm.
And it's not that within the alien mythos there isn't the interdimensional aspect, because they talk about that too, but they're moving us to intergalactic versus interdimensional. And I would encourage people to say stay focused on interdimensional because it's the common history.
Right. Yep. You're right about that too. They don't really talk about galactic stuff. It's all here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Realms and things. Yeah, I
Yep.
get that too. Um, I was trying to see if there was any more questions in chat. I don't think there is. That I
Now,
can see.
one of the things that you want to have an understanding on is that when they're mixing intergalactic with star people, that doesn't mean they're talking about something in a vast sort of universe. Stars are an allegory for angels, and angels have a specific star that's assigned to them. So they are the host of heaven. They are the star people. So when ancient cultures talk about star people coming down and creating the giants, and that the giants are also in part star people, they're the offspring of the fallen angels or the gods. But that doesn't mean they came from some distant galaxy. They're created in this physical earth and everything that's within that earth in different sort of dimensions. So look for star people as being um, a misdirection, and they know they can get away with it because it has more than sort of one meaning, right? In terms of what we understand stars are. Their heaven is in the earth, not in the space area outside of the sun. It's not. That's where their home is of their gods, in the earth. And we need to keep our eyes sort of focused on that. But they're also understood as being stars. But that doesn't mean that their creatures or their offspring are coming from other planets, coming from what was done in this physical realm. So keep in mind some of the double entendres that the royales in the polytheist world will use, because they're very good with allegories, double entendres, symbols, taciturn language, all of that.
Mm-hmm. There is another question. It says, what is your opinion on the first people's knowledge of Sasquatch in their stories and beliefs?
Yeah, I think they're accurate. They also have accountings of the same groups of little people that I talked about. They also have their own accountings of giants in their oral traditions. The only reason why I don't quote a lot of First Nations in North America is because we don't have a written record. Whereas I had a Popol Vuh and some other written records down south. I don't use really much for Norse records or Finnish records because no written record, it's an oral tradition, or same with Africa. But it doesn't mean they don't have the same history recorded in their oral traditions, but I need reference points as a researcher, so that people can say, well, you just talked to somebody, you just made it up. I kind of need a little bit more on that to be taken seriously, but I do take all of those accounts sort of seriously. So, yeah, I think their records of Bigfoot and Sasquatch are 100% accurate. And this is a common legacy, again, on all planets, on all continents, all around the earth, in all religions. And it doesn't matter whether it's Yeti or it's Sasquatch, it's the same creature that's being talked about. So
Yep.
we should take that very, very seriously. It's those common denominators. It's like having pyramids everywhere. How do you have the same engineering instructions and designs in all of these cultures that never associated with each other.
Exactly.
It's all brainwashing, and they don't want us to connect these dots.
They really don't. They do their
Yeah.
best to hide. Hmm.
So some of the giant tribes, just so people know what I'm talking about, of North American Indians, like the Hopi called them the Pahana, the White Snake Clan. The Suske that called them, they were called the Suske by the Hanoks. You have Site by the Paiutes. You have Nahulo and Starnaki and Manta. That's by Natchez, Comanche, and the Puro. And there's more. Again, you have giants in all cultures.
Yeah.
And again, you have, even within the First Nations in North America, you have a 4-class system.
Hmm.
It's the same class system. You have bloodline chiefs, bloodline shamans, and then you have the 2 lower classes. It's always the same way. It doesn't show up any other way. It's just a common sort of history. And once we grasp that, then we can start to figure out who's really running this world.
Exactly. There's one more question on here. It says, I think he's talking about cryptid, Sasquatch. Are they flesh and blood even when they travel through dimensional, travel through portals?
Yeah, I think they are. And again, I think they have some sort of space, but a safe place in another dimension. So when we look at images of beings that are recorded in prehistory, they're shown in an orb or some sort of encased sort of framework. I look at that as like a quantum bubble
Hmm.
that's protecting them to come through another
Yep.
dimension. That's just my speculation. But the gods don't need anything like that, right? So like Baal comes through the gateway of Hades at Mount Hermon when he was ruling to inspect his realm of the physical world and back to the underworld on a regular sort of basis. But there's something more that's required for the lower level beings, and they need that technology that hasn't been given to them, because I don't think the gods want their offspring to overthrow them.
Yeah.
So there's a level of technology involved.
Hmm. I have a question about the First Nations people. This has confused me to death the whole time I've been into cryptids and stuff like that for years. Some of the First Nations people say these are friendly forest giants about the Sasquatch, and the other half will say that they're bad and not to be around them and basically
Yeah. So how could they be
get
both?
rid of. Right. So,
It's classic dualism of polytheism. So they have a macro and a micro. So the macro is, will raise Satan from a Western understanding up to be the equal of God, right? Good
mhm,
versus evil. Depending on which side you're on, that's how it's viewed. Within polytheism, they have dualism as well. So you have black magic and white magic. You have good royales and evil royales. You have good giants and evil giants. So depending on which side of that white hat and dark hat, which is the modern term that we see used, you would be looking at which giants were part of which set of gods to be good or evil. And so the difference gets to be is that you could have 2 groups of Bigfoot, one that are on the dark side, as they would call them, and one on the white side. And they have the same pantheon of gods that they worship and come from, but they have different methodology as to how they deal with the humans. So the white hats are the ones that say they have humankind's better interest at heart. Whereas the dark hats, they would just eliminate us completely right away and are the enemies. But they worship the same pantheon of God. So they have the same agenda, just two different methods to cattle herd us in that direction. So I would take the analogy and apply that to the Bigfoot, depending on which gods are being worshiped, how they're going to be distinguished between good and evil and whichever side you're on. And each of the humans, depending on who they're worshiping, same with for the offspring creatures like Bigfoot.
Right. I get that now. Wow, but that's always confused me. I'm like, which is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could
Well,
never get that.
it's it's the same in the ancient Sanskrit and Iranian, Avestan, and Zoroastrianism. You have devas and asuras. One are the good ones in India, and you move over to the same religion with the Avestan style of the Persians, and it's flipped. The ones that are good in Persia are the evil ones in India, and vice versa for the other set. So between whichever one you're on, between Diva
Right.
and Asura, whichever part of that religion you're on. So that just shows you this historical nature to that division.
Yeah.
And Asuras uh, actually means not Saurus in some of the languages, so that makes it even more confusing. So
Yeah.
Asuras are supposed to be the good ones in one side. So be just try and keep that dualism in mind when you're seeing those types of things. And like I say, the easiest way is good magic and black magic. Two different power structures that are have rivalries and different ways of getting to the end goal.
Okay. I was just wondering about that. Thank you for answering that. Appreciate it. Um, Also, I appreciate you coming on and talking about all this. It's so much knowledge, and I love that that you explain it so easily where people can understand it too. Do you want to share
Well,
where people could buy your books?
Yeah, so the best place to support me if you like what I'm saying is number one, I don't take donations of any sort. The only revenue I accept is sale of books. And if I'm speaking at a conference, if the conference makes money, I would take something off of that as well. So if you like me and want to get a hold of me, go to my website. On my website, there's a contact the author, and there's also a buy now page. Also on the website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book one, all 84 chapters of book two. I have a small excerpt of the Oprimo Conspiracy, AI's Covenant with Babylon, a novel I partnered with that released in April about how the end time might come about from our perspective today and how AI will have an impact on that end time. Um, and if you go to the buy now page, you'll click on it. And for book one, there'll be a page for Canada, there'll be a page for the US, and there'll be a page for anywhere else in the world. And there's also multiple discounts. So wherever you live on, you click on that. So buy page one is for book one, buy page two is for book two, buy page three is for the Aprimo Conspiracy, buy page four is bundling for books one and two, buy page five is bundling for all three. There's discounts with all of that. And yes, I do sign copies and or personalized in any way, an inscription that you want there. You can also link over from my website to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, BarnesandNoble.com for the print copy and for the Kindle version of all three of the books, and for just the Audible version for books one and two, as we work to do another Audible version. Hopefully, we'll get things cleared up with Amazon for the Primo Conspiracy. It's been produced, but there's a problem in them wanting to release it. We're not sure why, so we're getting another one done that we'll do through other formats. So the books are available in all three formats. Primo Conspiracy, expect that Audible out, at least on the second format, within 30 days. And that's the best way to support me.
Awesome. I'll get all your links to Amazon and everything and the website, and I'll put it underneath this video when we're done. I'll go
Okay.
find everything under
Yeah,
there.
I'll send you an email with all of those links.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to be here. I was so happy that you came on.
Yeah, well, hopefully your audience liked how I connect some of the dots. And this is about, what I try and do is I try and get information out there and to have people hopefully have some curiosity raised and start to learn about things yourself, because we all have to learn why we're here and what this world is all about. And I'm not, I am a Christian. I'd love people to be all Christians, but I want people to learn for themselves and to make your own decisions. And remember that no decision is a decision.
Right.
So choose to know why you believe what you believe.
Yeah, the information's out there. It's just a shame that we get indoctrinated with a false world
Yeah,
and a false history. That's just terrible that they do that. I don't even know what
yeah,
the point of it is, but whatever.
yep. And
That's
then they
fine.
and then they lose religions to divide us.
Yeah, everything's for division.
Yep.
So, yeah. Well, I wanted to thank you again, and I think that was all the questions in the comments. So, but thanks for everybody in the comments. Thank you, Gary, for coming on, and I'd love to have you back on again to talk about your other book
Sure.
if you would like to.
Yep.
All right, I'll
Absolutely.
keep I'll keep in touch um,
Okay.
with you about that. Thank you so much. And I'm just gonna head and do this. Did you have anything else you needed to say?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end this. Thank you guys for being here. See you next one.